Not surprising. And we've got to start with prorogation. Will Trudeau prorogue the government? Meaning just end all business of Parliament. He can't do what he wants anyway. The only reason to go to Parliament now is to get browbeaten by the Conservatives about why they're not handing over the corruption documents to the RCMP so the RCMP can arrest them already. So I don't see any reason why Trudeau wouldn't want to prorogue Parliament. And so we'll see. Is he going to prorogue? Is this going to happen? Mr. Sunshine Baby thinks so, and Ryan thinks so, and there's lots to get to. Let's get to it first. Obviously, we've got to talk about prorogation and the election and all of that, the rest of that. And Ryan says Parliament is stuck in privilege debates after the Liberals failed to hand over key documents on $400 million in misspent funds that Conservatives, the Bloc and NDP and the Liberal Speaker have demanded. Will Justin prorogue Parliament? And I think yes. And this is just somebody picking up a plasticine Parliament building and then mushing it up. So cool. And I think that's interesting. Mr. Sunshine Baby says, holy cow, prorogation on the table for Justin Trudeau. This would shut down all of Parliament until the new year. No press conferences, no debates, nothing. What the F is going on? Justin Trudeau knows his time is up. He's going full dictator this week. So Brittany asks, what would happen to the Hogue inquiry? Is this Winnipeg Lab 2.0? And Mr. Sunshine Baby says everything would get shut down from my understanding. So that he thinks includes the Hogue inquiry. I think he's accurate on that. So pretty crazy stuff, right? And if that happens, Jagmeet Singh gets his pension slam dunk. Like, no problem whatsoever, right? So pretty interesting. Here is John Rustad. Sorry. Now that he's turned his back on Conservatives, I'm going to start mispronouncing his name again. No, I won't. John Rustad says, I want to take a moment to clarify my position on a critical issue. In a recent interview, I misunderstood the question and question posed to me and wish to be unequivocal in my response. Any attempt to compare or equate the Nuremberg trials or Nazi Germany to the COVID-19 pandemic is completely inappropriate and unacceptable. The Nuremberg trials were a monumental moment in history where justice was served for some of the most heinous crimes ever committed. I don't know that that's what happened during Nuremberg, but that's for a different conversation. To compare these trials, which sought accountability for the atrocities of the Holocaust, to any modern day, I don't know that that's what the Nuremberg trials were directly about. To any modern day public health measures is a distortion of history and deeply disrespectful, to the memory of those who suffered. I strongly condemn any such comparisons and reaffirm my commitment to preserving the integrity of historical truths. Historical truths. And so Jen says, what question did you think you were answering here? And so the question is, are you okay for a Nuremberg 2.0? Ferguson asked. A new and bigger 2.0? Sorry? Rustad replied, confused, prompting the anti-vaccine activist reporter to repeat himself more slowly. Nuremberg 2.0. Ah, yes, Rustad repeated. That's probably something outside of my scope. I know it's a hard one. I knew it, Ferguson interrupted. I put you on the hot spot right there for sure, but I had to ask. No, it's fine, Rustad replied. Like I say, that's something that's sort of outside the scope in terms of jurisdiction of British Columbia. But if you know, we would certainly be participating with other jurisdictions as we look at those sorts of issues. So is this a backpedal, or does this clarification make sense to you? What do you think about this statement? It's one of those things where in order to talk about the similarities or differences between Nuremberg and what happened, or between what happened during Hitler's reign versus COVID, and the tyranny and the expectation of the citizenry to do what the government expected, etc., etc. I feel like, me personally, I feel like there is an argument to be made that there were similarities for what people believed the tyranny was at the time. There was tyranny at the time and people couldn't fight against it. And I feel like in COVID, there was a very similar feeling. If you didn't do what the government wanted you to do, then the government was going to make sure you couldn't go on trains. The government was going to make sure you got fired without compensation. They were going to do all sorts of things to you, and it felt very aggressive. Well, Without Papers Pizza says, in the end, they came for my picnic tables. They had stripped me of all my papers, so I closed my doors and gave away pizza out front. That pissed them off, so they took my tables. I put out milk crates. They took them too. All because I fed an unvaccinated man a pizza. So like on one side, I can see people trying to unify and say, we've got to move on, and this historical comparison is inappropriate and blah 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 blah. But I really think that there is a comparison, and I think that we need accountability, and I think Nuremberg itself had its own issues, and I think our modern understanding of what happened in the Second World War has issues, and so it's difficult to get bogged down in all of that, when I think the thrust of what I'm trying to say is fundamentally there was tyranny then and there's tyranny now, and we should fight against the tyranny now. And regardless of the historical comparison, it seems like Rustad is backing away from holding people accountable, and that bothers me a lot. And so what do you think? Do you think that this statement about the historical comparison is correct? Do you think Rustad is bang on and most people are going to get on board with that? Or do you think that he's incorrect? And I mean, like, read the responses. There are a lot of people who are as pissed off as I am about the optics of all of this. There's a newspaper article talking about, it's right here, you can look at it, it's part of the links that are in the description. You can check that out if you're interested, with him being asked a question, and the report is in press progress. So the report is very crooked anyway, and even so, he's trying to do damage control, but I think he's doing damage to his own campaign. Let me know what you think. I think there's a comparison, and I think he's walking away from accountability because it's too hard. And he's worried maybe that somebody will try and hold him accountable when he's on his way out of office, right? And so tit for tat, you don't do that to your opponent in hopes that your opponent doesn't do that to you, right? And so walking away from accountability at this point in time, that's the feeling I get. So you let me know what you think in the comments. BCNDP is saying, under our John Rustad government, abusers, gang members, and traffickers would be allowed to carry assault weapons unchecked. Like, are they talking about needles? Like dicks carrying needles around? Bonnie Henry carrying needles around? Right? Horgan carrying needles around? Is that what they're talking about here? Stop John Rustad from letting gangs carry assault needles. Rifles, excuse me. Weird, right? It's an attack ad. I don't think it's very effective. Up until now, the BCNDP have been pretty desperate. I think they're probably going to continue to be pretty desperate. So they're going to continue to put out attack ads and see what hits. We're a week out. I think, what is it, the 15th? I think the 15th, right around there, 13, 14, 15 is when the election is. So not that long, not that far out. And it's interesting. Things are heating up in BC for the provincial election. Michael Barrett, federally, says, enough. A common sense conservative law will ensure that anyone found guilty of arson at a place of worship will face an increased penalty of a mandatory 5 years in prison. Stop the chaos, stop the fire, stop the crime. And so it'll be interesting if the Conservatives get in. I think there will be a big change in Canada. I don't know it'll be a full rollback. I still feel like we'll be on the way to a 2030 agenda. But if they follow through, people will really like what happens compared to the Trudeau years. Like, the Trudeau years have been a flaming nightmare. Like, it's unbelievable. Brittany says, no house arrest, bail, or community service either. Even for a first offense, they should be bankrupt for a life too, due to fines. So it's one of those things where right now we're coddling criminals and punishing productive citizens with more taxes and higher fees for everything. And the Conservatives are saying, hey, we'll hold people accountable. Fingers crossed. They seem poised to be the next government. So if they do what they say they're going to do, a lot of people, as I said, will be very happy with them. Is it enough? I don't know. Roman Baber is responding to Mark Carney. I fear it's not. Like, just to be very clear, I fear it's not, because what's coming is full-blown censorship, full-blown everything centralized at the United Nations, the WHO, something to that effect. You get to administer your own state, kind of, sort of, but fundamentally, you're not in control. Whoever is in control at the United Nations or the EU, or whoever is in charge of Canada at the time, will be able to set policies and things like that. So I think that regardless of even who's in charge of Canada, if they're playing ball, even if they do something good short term, let's say by 2030, if they're playing ball with the 2030 agenda and the people who want an NWO, we are all going to lose regardless of what we want, because they're going to say, don't worry, it's going to be fine. And then when we get into it, it's not going to be fun. Look at what happened with the compact on migration, right? Like, it caused problems, real tangible problems, and we haven't been able to do a damn thing about it, right? And that's the same with a lot of the Liberal policies, caused real tangible problems. They doubled the price of housing. Like, what? That seems completely intolerable, yet here we are, and for a long time now, right? And that's not all. They increased the price of food. They've increased the price of everything. And we're just fine with that because they have a good excuse of climate change, which they haven't done a damn thing about, and they've lost ground in the world standings. It's completely insane. Anyway, Mark Carney, let's talk about grab bag of governance. Roman Baber is responding to Mark Carney. Mark Carney is talking about his book, and he says, excited that my new book, The Hinge, will be published by Signal in May 2025. And Roman Baber says, Mr. Carney, is it appropriate for you to accept the role of an advisor to Justin Trudeau and a week later solicit the federal government for $10 billion for a firm that you chair? It's not. And everybody knows that it's not. And so that's good job, Roman Baber, for trying to hold Mark Carney accountable for the inappropriate use of his connections, etc. And what's going to happen with all this? Probably Mark Carney is going to take over the Liberals and then lose an election and then leave, just like Michael Ignatieff, Stéphane Dion, and Paul Martin, all the other people who think I can run the Liberal Party, and then who get in there and realize that they're unlikable and unelectable. Just watch. If he gets in there, he won't get elected. They run the elections. They rig the elections. He might get in there if the elections are managed the way they've been managed over the last few years. So, but in an honest election, he doesn't win. Victoria says, September 2021, Trudeau stood on a podium and promised clean drinking water. He's been in power 9 years, and yet here we are. Liberals head to court to fight a class action lawsuit over unsafe drinking water in 4 First Nations, Paddy Haydu boasting clean water just weeks ago. So all these years later, and basic stuff is not done, and they're trying to pass censorship laws in the House of Commons, and everybody's cheering them on for it, right? That's the real danger, they say. Incredible. And we're stuck with it, right? We don't have any recourse, none whatsoever. True North says, if the Liberals keep unilaterally amending the impact assessment without addressing its constitutional flaws, Alberta will sue them again. And so Alberta won last time, and they were supposed to stop, but they're not stopping. And so Alberta says, hey guys, we're not gonna keep just letting you do this. True North reports Alberta Premier Danielle Smith sent a letter to Prime Minister Trudeau on Thursday warning that another legal challenge will be brought against the Liberals if they do not express intent to amend the Impact Assessment Act within the next 4 weeks. The letter included 14 pages of Alberta's proposed amendments that the feds need to make. Various outgoing concerns need to be addressed, and Smith, including the need to eliminate federal encroachments into provincial jurisdiction. The province added that the Liberals need to recognize equivalency with Alberta's environmental assessment to substitute the federal impact assessment, among numerous other concerns listed in the letter. Smith's letter was CC'd to provincial ministers Mickey Amery, Rebecca Schultz, and federal ministers Ari Farini, Stephen Guilbeault, and Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre. The Supreme Court of Canada ruled that the Liberals' impact assessment, the Liberals' impact assessment was largely unconstitutional in October 23. So, same thing, and they haven't changed anything. And so, interesting. We'll see. The Liberals don't seem to care about, the law or anything. Darshan Maharaja is talking about this. He says, I'm hearing about the Ontario Attorneys General and Crown Attorney's Office hiring international students in big numbers. I confess that I don't know what the arrangements or details are, so I'm keeping an open mind about this. Can anyone who's familiar with this fill me in? And so it's interesting because what do you mean big numbers? Like Tim Hortons Canadian Tire type numbers or something else, right? And the growth of the government jobs and the government sector is concerning because we need to cut that back. And if you cut that back, and that means a large swath of people lose their jobs, that's going to be unpopular, right? Because you've got to grow the private sector to make up for removal of the jobs in the government public sector area, right? So I don't know, man. It seems like a trap. The more they do this, the more they import people. It's all ideologic. It's power plays. It's so based on power plays. It has nothing. When I say like there's men and women, and I think that that's pretty standard, straightforward. Like very rock solid base to base my reality on, right? Like using that as an example. Somebody comes in and says, that's just your opinion, man. Like I'm neither of those things. Like, here you go. I exist, blah, 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 blah. And so there's a situation where, given enough power, that person holds, and we're in that situation now, that person wields political power, and politically they exist, right? But now we're in a situation where we have to spend money to make that person whole as a what, society or something to that effect. And so it's all based on a lie. It's all based on a power play. It's all based on this wedge being used to say reality is whatever we want it to be. And if you don't agree with us changing reality, well, actually, you're just a Luddite. You're being left behind. You don't understand how the world's actually working moving forward. And so as they gain power, they load institutions with their acolytes, and it doesn't end. Like Sri Lanka collapsed, and they still put in a Soros WEF puppet to run the place. So like, it is difficult to be in a situation to even use reality, or something that I think a lot of people would agree is a good cornerstone foundation for reality, the two sexes. Even using that can be disrupted with relative ease if you have enough incentive money to have people behave in crazy ways. And so they stack the deck with all of these ideological people, and those people wield power and use it to change reality. And it's just like, it's something to behold, because, you know, you think that politics is left and right. You think that they're talking about, the nature of the orange cup, right? The left views a half full orange cup, the right views a half empty orange cup, and you argue about that. But we're actually arguing about the fabric of reality itself, right? Is there a cup, and who's holding it? And is the liquid inside poison? And like, how does it identify? There's all sorts of crazy other questions that used to not come into the discord, and now it's being used to wedge us. Now it's being used to divide us. And like, I don't know how you unring the bell. I don't know how you stop it, because I think there is such a thing as objective reality. I think that men and women are a good foundation again. And I think that it's invalid to come at reality from this idea of it can just be manipulated into whatever we want it to be. And if you don't believe that, then you're crazy. But the political power to stop what's happening doesn't exist. The political will to stop what's happening doesn't exist, because it comes with costs, like them trying to kill you, a la Trump, them trying to brand you a racist, throw you in jail, censor everything. All of these things, this is the cost. And if you stand up and say, like, this doesn't exist or whatever, if you try and stand up for that foundational reality, then you're going to be torn down by the people who are incentivized by this fictional reality to bring this fictional reality about. I hope I'm being clear. I don't know if I am. Anyway, let's carry on back to the tabs. Trina says, Ontario's education curriculum is infected with Marxist nonsense. Yeah, it's teaching the kids the alternate reality and teaching them to go along with it. Teaching them that if they step out of line, they're socially going to be destroyed. Welcome to high school, right? And I think that this is accurate. It's long, and we know like all of the previous stories that they cite we've talked about before. So I'll just read the top part. In a province that's added a generous share of race, communism, and guilt politics to its classrooms and teacher training materials in the past decade, it shouldn't be a surprise that some teachers are taking kids to protests. Ontario's curriculum includes teachings that promote Marxism, critical race theory, and the identification and shaming of dominant groups in society, all while denigrating colonialism and white people by proxy as a simplistic force of evil. So last week, when Toronto Public Schools students were shepherded to a pro-Palestinian protest, some wearing blue to identify themselves as settlers, it was hard to feel shocked. This is Ontario's education system working almost as intended, just with a tad more enthusiasm as required by government. So yeah, there's some real problems. I've been screaming about it for years. I've been telling the education minister in Ontario that they're doing black student-only dances in Ontario high schools. Seemingly they stopped that in 2022. I haven't heard about that since. So maybe my racket actually changed something, fingers crossed. But I said, how can you people say that you're for inclusion and all of these other, high morality, high road ideals, and at the same time support these racially segregated things? If racial segregation was negative in the 60s when done to other races by one race, it's wrong now when done by other races to that target race previously. Or, I mean, to say it another way, when it was done by whites to blacks, it was racist, but when it's done by blacks to whites, it's not. Give me a break, right? Like, come on. So, finally, people are noticing. Finally, people are understanding what's going on and talking about it. So, I mean, the first step to solving a problem is identifying the problem. And that's why censorship is the main weapon, because if they lose control of speech, if they lose control of what people talk about, then they might be held accountable. Forsaken Warriors, we did a kitchen table talk on Sunday, and it was really fun. It was a good conversation. And there were a couple of documentaries that were shared. This is one of them. Aaron Gunn, I think he's running the Conservative Party's communication shop at this point in time. And he does these documentaries. And this is 2.5 minutes of a trailer for Forsaken Warriors. And this is on my list of things to watch. I actually thought this was the whole thing, and so my bad. But this is one of the things, new things on CanadaReport.co's things to watch if you're interested in keeping up with that. I haven't seen this one yet, and I hear it's really good. So thanks, Kenzie, for that recommendation. And here is, what's her name? Frances Widdowson and Regina Public Library, crazy raw footage. So at 35 minutes, there's a guy who gets upset about the name of the book, which includes the N-word, and Frances Widdowson does not shy away from saying the N-word. She's very clear, and somebody's in the audience is like, whoa, hold on, like, why do we have to be saying this here right now? What's going on? And she says, because it's the name of the book. Like here's the book, it's the name of the book. And then this guy gets upset about it. I haven't actually watched him get upset yet. I read in the first comment, it says, I got to the 35-minute mark, and the black guy there who threatened the 86-year-old man and then hijacked the conversation and didn't even let the Indigenous person talk. This is a perfect example of what's wrong with society. When people feel triggered, they yell, and I guess I can't read anymore. So weird YouTube, right? But anyway, it's interesting what's going on to Frances Widdowson. It is interesting because they're trying to fire her. She has gone through... It happened 2 years ago. She's gone through legal proceedings. It's been determined that she was fired improperly, and that's what she's going through during this footage here. And she's going through what she was fired for and why the university is incorrect to fire her and why she can't be reinstated. And it's it's interesting. You should check it out. But this is just one of the many battles going on about free speech in Canada, like not just online speech, but academic freedom of speech. One of the things that she argues is that one of the reasons she was suspended, and I mean, again, if you're interested, the link should be in the description, but she was suspended for arguing that academic freedom meant arguing that native ways of knowing are not scientific. And so she was saying, two separate issues, and she would argue that. She says, that native ways of knowing are not, I'm perhaps paraphrasing, so she says it in here, and I'm not meaning to misrepresent what she says, but that you should be able to academically argue that is one issue, and that if the question was, are native ways of knowing scientific, her argument would be no. And so it's two separate issues, and she's being punished for that. And she's saying, well, we have an academic responsibility to argue about this. We have an academic responsibility to bring this question forward and to argue about it and to have a definitive answer about it. And they don't want to. And so that's interesting. It's super interesting. Like, all of these speech arguments are I mean, I don't think necessary, because I think fundamentally speech should be, you should be allowed to say what you want, and you should be allowed to make the arguments that you think are important to be made. And like, if you, especially in this case, like if you're a teacher, the arguments that you're making probably would align with what you're teaching. And there's all sorts of issues further and more broad to consider when talking about freedom of speech and academic freedom of speech, and how that leads into educating our kids, right? And so like, and it cuts both ways. So you have to be careful, but at the same time, I think like, I think fundamentally freedom of speech is paramount, because otherwise you just get caught in ideology all the time. You're just in one ideology or another. Like if speech isn't free, you are the subject of whatever ideology has captured the institution you're part of, and that's it. And like, that's sucks, right? Like, food professor, let's talk about this. A recent CRTC report reveals that trust in Canadian news media has dropped to a new low, with only 32% of Canadians expressing confidence in mainstream media, down from 37% last year. That's a problem. I guess so. I think it's a problem that the other day on YouTube, on the home tab, like on my studio home tab, I had like 500 odd views on my daily video, and that happens quick, right? People wait for the show to come out, and then they watch it very quickly. And so like, I get the majority of my views between like in the first 5 hours or whatever, right? But then when I clicked into my content, right, I had 300 views. Not weird? That's so super weird, right? That's, what are you gonna do? But the censorship is palpable. They don't want people like me and my ideas getting out there. It's interesting, super interesting. Usually, if people lose faith in the mainstream media at the tune of 70%, they seek out other media. But I guess nobody likes me. I put out a terrible show. Oh well. For the people who know, dozens of us, they know. Brian says, Hillary Clinton says social media platform X should be censored, otherwise we lose total control. My thoughts are the same as this woman's thoughts, and I've been talking about them for a while. I think they depend on censorship, just like it depended those people who were responding to the bells being rung, like the bing, bing, and they stood up and they sat down. If they had one person who was in there who wasn't doing the standing and the sitting, then all of them would stop standing and sitting pretty quick. People would realize, and then they'd all stop responding to the bell. And so they had to have censorship. They had to remove those people in order for them to get their plan done. And that's what she says too. And I think that she's right. And I think that I'm right. And the more we stand around and say, no, prosecute me, the more they're going to desperately try and prosecute us. And the more they're going to realize it's going to be really hard, not hard to change the laws, hard to get the public on board to lynch people like me. Because that's who they need to lynch. The people who go, nope, no, I'm not doing it. And stand there and say no, right? They need to throw people like me in jail. And every time they throw somebody like me in jail, they wake another person up like me. That's it. But also their problem is I wake up people like me. So they don't like people like me. Anyway, here is this woman saying the same things that I say. Here we go.
The biggest fear that the World Economic Forum has is that there are going to be people that will not comply. Their biggest fear is your fight for freedom. Their biggest fear is that you will make individual decisions for yourself and you will not follow their orders. So this digital stuff is absolutely key, because without it, they can't enforce anything. Without it, they can't mandate that you do something. Without it, they can't control your life. So I don't care if you're talking about carbon emissions and what's safe and effective as far as they are concerned. I don't care if they're talking about an experimental injection, a series of injections, whatever they may be, and what's safe and effective as far as they're concerned. This is not about those individual things. This is about the desire to control you from the outside in. And if they have a digital process whereby they can restrict your movement, your behavior, and your decisions with the click of a button, you are done. The biggest fear that the world...
Right. So they need buy-in to get there. They need people to say, yeah, it is dangerous to have, regular money so that somebody could go spend money on something and we can't track it. So we know if they're spending it on terrorism or, snacks for the movie, right? Like, they have to have people on board in order to have this system in place. But once they have it in place, look out, because it'll come for you, right? And yeah, Hello, everyone. Thanks very much for watching. This is just a short version of a longer show. If you'd like to get the whole show, you can go over to CanadaPoly.com and sign up for a subscription. Just look in the drop-down tab for Shop and Donate and look for subscriptions, and you'll get immediate access to the full show. Love to see you. Thanks for watching, everybody. Have a wonderful, wonderful